For years, George Clooney wore his bachelor status the way other men wear wedding rings, with total commitment and absolutely no interest in changing it. He wasn't simply unmarried. He was devoted to the idea, publicly, repeatedly, and with a consistency that eventually stopped making people ask why. Reporters stopped pushing. Industry gossips accepted it as settled fact. Even the string of extraordinarily beautiful and accomplished women who moved through his life over the years couldn't dislodge the conviction. Then a mutual friend arranged for a human rights lawyer named Amal Clooney to stay at his villa on Lake Como, Italy, sometime in 2013. And everything George had spent nearly 2 decades constructing as his personal philosophy simply collapsed. What came after? The engagement, the Venice wedding, the twins, the Provence estate, the shared humanitarian work, became one of the most closely watched love stories in modern celebrity culture. Millions of people followed it with genuine emotional investment, rooting for the reformed bachelor, charmed by the brilliant lawyer who hadn't gone looking for a famous husband and clearly hadn't needed one. But behind the elegant photographs and the well-managed public appearances, real pressures accumulated. Long transatlantic separations, an age difference of 17 years that grew harder to ignore. A moment when George said something he shouldn't have, to the wrong audience, about the wrong person. And a woman with firm professional principles who made very clear what the consequences of that lapse would look like. This is the actual story of George and Amal Clooney, told from the beginning, and it goes considerably deeper than anything the glossy magazine covers chose to show. George Clooney's first marriage began the way many decisions made in your 20s begin. Fast, emotionally overwhelming, and completely disconnected from the practical reality of the life you're actually living. He met actress Talia Balsam in 1984 during a community theater production, and the attraction hit him immediately. Talia wasn't an ordinary aspiring actress. She was the daughter of Academy Award-winning actor Martin Balsam and actress Joyce Van Patten, which meant she carried a natural charisma that felt professionally calibrated over 2 generations. George fell completely. They dated, parted ways, spent some years apart, and when they reconnected, he convinced himself that a second chance meant they should formalize everything. They married in Las Vegas in 1989. Quickly and without the deliberate consideration that might have served them both better. 3 years in, the marriage buckled under the weight of his accelerating career and an ulcer that literally began to bleed from the stress he carried. Talia ended it. George, years later, accepted responsibility without equivocation. He hadn't been someone who should have been married at that point in his life, and he hadn't given her a fair chance at the partnership she deserved. What followed was a public pledge that he would not put himself or anyone else through that experience again. That pledge hardened into identity over the years that followed. Kelly Preston came and went, then model Lisa Snowden, then Italian actress Elisabetta Canales, then Stacy Keibler, who had built a career as a professional wrestler before transitioning into acting. He and Keibler were together for nearly 2 years, long enough that tabloids treated the relationship as a probable endpoint, and they appeared on red carpets with the comfortable ease of people who knew each other well. When the breakup came, it was attributed to incompatible long-term visions, the polished way of saying they wanted different things. In a 2006 People magazine interview, a reporter asked George directly about marriage, and his answer ran to exactly one flat sentence. Marriage, who can say for sure? No conflict visible in it, no wistfulness. The man had decided, and the decision felt permanent. And then the Lake Como visit changed everything. Amal Clooney arrived at George's Italian villa through a mutual friend, without fanfare, during what George later described as the moment that shook his entire sense of what was possible. She was not someone who existed anywhere in the social or professional circles he normally moved through. No connection to Hollywood, no history of gravitating toward celebrities, no interest in the industry beyond whatever peripheral awareness a busy international lawyer might carry. What she had instead was a legal career that read like something assembled deliberately for maximum effect. She had defended former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. She had represented Egyptian-Canadian journalist Mohammed Fahmy. She had worked on Julian Assange's extradition case. Legal directories, including Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners, had independently identified her as a brilliant legal mind, and colleagues who appeared against her in court described her presence as commanding and always one strategic move ahead. None of this background had prepared anyone, including apparently George Clooney himself, for the experience of being in a room with her. Amal had grown up in Buckinghamshire, England, after her family left Beirut, Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War when she was a child. She earned a full scholarship to Oxford University's St. Hugh's College, graduated with honors, then continued to New York University School of Law, where she received a prize for entertainment law. She later served as a senior counselor to former United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan during his tenure as the UN envoy on Syria. By the time she appeared at George's villa, she had already built one of the more consequential legal practices in international human rights, taking on cases in the European Court of Human Rights and the International Criminal Court that most senior attorneys declined to touch. George later described his reaction in the plainest terms available to him. She showed up and suddenly it was like, well, this is different on every level for me. The pull he felt was immediate and unfamiliar, and he described wanting to prioritize her happiness in a way that had never occurred to him before with anyone. He was already working out the logistics of a proposal within months of meeting her. The execution of that proposal became one of the more genuinely human stories to emerge from a relationship the public had already decided was cinematic. George cooked dinner. He assembled a playlist built around recordings by his legendary aunt Rosemary Clooney, timing a specific song, Why Shouldn't I, to be playing at the exact moment he planned to propose. He placed the engagement ring in a nearby drawer where Amal would be sitting. Amal arrived home from a trip to London, walked through the door, and casually suggested they order takeaway instead of eating whatever he'd prepared. George held his plan together, served the dinner, waited for the music, and when the moment arrived, suggested she look in the drawer for a lighter. She opened it, saw the ring, assumed that it had been left behind by a previous house guest, closed the drawer, and returned to her meal. George, now entirely off script and visibly nervous, got down on one knee and started talking. Amal's response consisted of gasps and repeated variations of, "Oh my God," none of which constituted an actual answer. George stayed on the floor. The playlist, operating without any awareness of what was unfolding beneath it, cycled forward to a song called Goody Goody. 25 minutes passed. George eventually told her directly, "I really hope the answer is yes, but I really need an answer." He then pointed out that at 52, he could throw out his hip pretty soon. She laughed. She said yes. They married in Venice in September 2014, surrounded by family and close friends, and the bachelor era officially ended. What the couple built together in the years following that ceremony carried real weight beyond the celebrity narrative. The Clooney Foundation for Justice launched in 2016, with both of them working across multiple countries on education access and court accountability. Amal continued her international legal work, while George made a deliberate choice to take acting roles rather than directing projects, because directing would require extended absences from his family that he wasn't willing to accept. Their twins, Ella and Alexander, were born and immediately protected from press attention with a seriousness George stated plainly, telling journalists outright that he didn't want photographs of his children in circulation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the family stayed home for an extended period partly because Alexander had been diagnosed with asthma, and the risk wasn't one they were prepared to take lightly. Their principal home became an 18th-century castle on a 425-acre wine estate in Provence, France, known as Domaine de la Canadelle, featuring a pool, tennis court, ornamental lake, olive grove, and a working vineyard, purchased for approximately $8.3 million. Properties in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Italy completed their real estate holdings. The structure of their lives was deliberate, built to keep the children away from the kind of scrutiny that follows the offspring of two of the most recognizable people in the world. For a long time, it held. None of that structure fully absorbed the impact of what happened when George gave an interview and went further than he should have. In discussing his friendship with Prince Harry, George disclosed details of private conversations, revealing what Harry had specifically told him about his struggles with royal responsibilities and his desire for a life outside the relentless press attention that came with the British monarchy. These were not statements Harry had made publicly. They were confidences, shared between two people who understood what it felt like to live under constant external scrutiny. And George moved them into the public record without apparent awareness of the cost. For someone whose professional life runs entirely on the principle that private communications stay protected, whose international clients routinely face consequences measured in lost freedoms and upended lives, the casual movement of a friend's private struggles into a public interview wasn't a minor misstep. Amal issued what people close to the situation characterized as an ultimatum, a demand that George establish and hold clear limits with the press, not as a temporary adjustment, but as a permanent change in how he handled the boundary between what he knew and what he shared. The concern extended well beyond Harry. It connected directly to the children, to the careful privacy architecture she and George had spent years building around Ella and Alexander, and to the genuine risks carried by both of their professional lives, his from politically sensitive projects, hers from high-stakes international legal cases. George took the terms seriously. He pulled back, reassessed the way he had been operating in public conversations, and confronted what that pattern had cost him in the trust of people who had confided in him. Those close to the couple reported they came out the other side with tighter communication and a clearer mutual understanding of the values their partnership actually rested on when pressure was applied. Running alongside that episode, quieter but persistent, was an anxiety George had been carrying for some time. The age difference between him at 63 and Amal at 46 had always existed as a simple biographical fact. What changed was how George experienced it as time moved forward. He had spent decades as one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood, and watching that version of himself give way to something visibly older, while Amal remained as sharp and as striking and as relentlessly engaged with the world as the woman who had walked into his Lake Como villa, produced an insecurity he hadn't anticipated. His response was effort. Carefully planned lunches, long walks after dinner, small gestures placed where she would find them in the morning, the kind of sustained attention that tells a person they haven't been filed away as familiar background, while life moves to the foreground. The relocation to Provence, designed to give them distance from the noise and space for the children to grow without cameras at every edge, had introduced its own complications, with divergent schedules gradually pushing two people who loved each other into the shape of roommates sharing an extraordinary house. George, the man who had once declared himself fundamentally unsuited for marriage and meant it, was now the one working hardest to keep this one intact. He had said years earlier that meeting Amal changed everything for him, and the evidence of the life they had built together supported the claim completely. The foundation, the twins, the Provence estate, the deliberate career adjustments, the careful management of their children's privacy, none of it looked like a man going through motions. What it looked like was someone who had arrived late at something he hadn't believed in and refused to let it go without every available effort. The marriage had weathered public scrutiny, a significant breach of trust, a growing age gap, and the structural pressure of two large professional lives pulling in different directions across different continents. Where it goes from here, neither of them has said publicly. What George has shown, through every uncomfortable adjustment and every small romantic gesture placed against the ordinary friction of a long marriage, is that the eternal bachelor is gone, and the man who replaced him has no intention of leaving quietly.